Welcome. Welcome to Module 3 of the Administration Code Regulations Training 703 KAR 5080. My name is Shara Savage in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. During Module 3, we will cover the appropriate assessment practices, such as the required training for administering a state assessment. The Administration Code applies to all state-required pieces of the accountability system using the paper, pencil, or computers or digital technology. Any person with the potential to be involved with any component of the state-required testing must be trained on the Administration Code regulation prior to beginning the work. This could include, but not limited to, principals, off-grade teachers, substitutes, accommodation providers, librarians, etc. Any individual providing accommodations to special needs students must also receive training in the inclusions of special populations training. Volunteers who are involved in state testing, such as providing accommodations or helping with proctoring, must meet certain stipulations that also apply to school staff. No student may administer a state assessment. This includes peer tutoring. All volunteers must have background and safety checks, receive confidential training as well as the Administration Code and Inclusions of Special Populations training, and sign a non-disclosure form. The volunteers must be under the strong oversight of a certified person who will be responsible for the test administration. If there should be a testing allegation involving a college student, the certified staff person in charge of the testing environment must be submitted on the allegation report. Schools and districts may use materials provided by the Kentucky Department of Education or those produced locally. Solely reading the regulation and signing the signature page at the end of the document shall not be considered adequate training. Training shall include interaction regarding the content of the regulation with supporting examples and stipulations, and providing opportunities to ask questions, etc. The intent or the meaning of interaction is for the training to be more than simply being assigned to read and sign the document. The DACS and BAC manual and TAMS are to be the guiding documents for the test administration procedures. Reading the TAMS is expected as part of the required training. Following vendor test administration manuals is of the utmost importance. Districts are charged with maintaining records of individuals receiving the administration code. The participation records may be maintained through collecting individual signature sheets found on the last page of the Administration Code Regulations document, or by the retention of the group training attendance signature pages. Copies of the signature page or group training attendance sheet may be maintained in a hard copy or electronic format. A copy of the group signature sheet is available on the KDE website. Training participants are held professionally accountable for their actions after signing either type of signature sheet. Notice on both sheets it states, "By signing, I acknowledge having received a copy of the Administration Code for Kentucky's Educational Assessment Program 703 KAR 5080 and have participated in training for this regulation. I also agree to comply with the complete content of the regulation and understand that I will be held professionally accountable." Anyone assisting with the state testing will sign the non-disclosure form. Assistance includes handling of testing materials, escorting students, providing accommodations, and more. Discussions or sharing test content details with others, even though they have been trained and are participating in test administrations, is not allowed. Non-disclosure forms can be found on the Forms page in the Accountability and Assessment section of the KDE website. Resources and materials available to students during testing are dependent upon the assessment. Please check the test administration manual for further guidance on what should be at the student's workstation during testing. During an assessment, test administrators shall not distribute, make available, or attach to students' workstation any information or materials that are not sent as part of the assessment materials or specified in the test administration manuals or in a student's plan. Examples of not acceptable resources include copies of acronym sheets or sheets of paper containing a system or for organizing answers, test booklets, computer tools, or other reference resources. A student's IEP 504 plan or PSP allows the student to have additional resources not mentioned in the script. Please check with your back concerning accommodations. Blank writing or graph paper, clear or colored overlay sheets, and bookmarks free of content are allowed at the student's workstation, even though their use are not clearly stated in the test administration manual. Some schools use brightly colored pieces of paper or district or school supplied bookmarks to mark where testing will stop in the session. Whether or not a dictionary or thesaurus is allowed on the test will be covered in the test administration manual or the TAM. The test administrator should refer to the listing of approved and unapproved materials in the TAM to determine when to provide a resource. On-demand writing is the only content area where a student is allowed to have a dictionary or thesaurus. Online testing provides an electronic dictionary and thesaurus to each student. For paper pencil testing or as a backup for online testing, a classroom set of dictionaries or thesaurus should be available for students. Reading, mathematics, science, or social studies content area tests do not allow the use of a dictionary or thesaurus unless clearly stated as an accommodation in a student's plan. It is a local decision by schools or districts on whether to allow students access to non-content related materials such as books or puzzles after the student has turned in his or her testing materials to the administrator. Please note that this is after the student has no testing materials at the workstation. Unlike dictionaries or thesaurus, calculators may be used in more than one content area. Check the TAM to determine if a calculator is allowed or if the test section is a no calculator math test. Online testing will provide the student with the type of calculator needed for that test session. It is expected that the student will use the online calculator and not a handheld calculator unless the student's accommodations plan specifies the use of a handheld calculator. Handheld calculators used for pencil paper or accommodated testing should adhere to the KDE's calculator policy, which is available on the KDE website. Be familiar with the requirements of each assessment that you administer. Some test vendors have their own calculator policy requirements that may differ from KDE's policy. KDE recommends that schools provide calculators for each student that meets the current calculator acceptable use criteria. However, students can use their own approved calculator for paper pencil tests. Test administrators are responsible for ensuring that communication and internet capabilities are disabled during testing sessions. This also includes turning off the computer algebraic system on a calculator. See the KDE calculator policy for details. It is not acceptable for students within the same testing session to share calculators, even if the test administrator clears the program in between uses. There should be a 1-to-1 ratio of calculators to students during a test session. Allegation tip: plan ahead of time to have all the necessary related materials such as dictionaries or thesaurus, calculators, etc. needed for testing both special needs and general education students. Use the test administration manual to check which materials are allowed for a test session. Except in cases where allowed, Students should not have access to electronic devices until all testing in the building is complete to ensure students are not communicating with other students in the testing session. Internet access may become necessary in the future for computer-based testing, but it is not acceptable to use an electronic device or the internet to gain a testing advantage. Electronic devices are everywhere and they are getting smaller every day, making our job of maintaining a fair and unbiased testing environment harder. Except in cases where allowed, students should not have access to electronic devices until all testing in the building is completed to ensure that students are not communicating with others in testing sessions. In the case of the ACT testing, smartwatches or Fitbits are not allowed since those devices can connect to the internet. A student may use an approved personal electronic device such as a calculator if the device meets the acceptable use criteria, which includes disabling the device communication and internet features. It is not acceptable to use electronic devices or the internet to gain a testing advantage. Online testing provides a secure browser to prevent accessing other parts of the internet, therefore not allowing a student to gain an unfair advantage during testing. It is acceptable for test administrators to use electronic devices to contact school administrators regarding test sessions. Teachers should be communicating with the building assessment coordinators or designee for assistance with situations in the classroom and not with each other while testing is occurring. BACs or your principals may routinely request that teachers use their personal cell phones to notify the office if a need in the classroom, such as an ill student needing to be escorted from the room or the test administrator needing a restroom break. However, neither student nor test administrator shall use the electronic device, such as but not limited to cell phones, tablets, e-readers, for personal reasons during testing, except in the case of an emergency. We've looked at cell phones, electronic devices, etc. Let's move on to the testing environment. A few years ago, when the regulation was updated, it was decided that testing room services would be free of content during the operational and field testing. Yes, this means bulletin boards, walls, and surfaces. It is acceptable to place instructional materials on the bulletin boards, walls, and etc. throughout the year, but when the room is used for testing, those same content materials must be removed or covered. Covered means a covering that's not see-through or opaque. Some examples of the materials are any content, information, or strategies for problem solving. These may be anywhere in the room, on the walls, floors, ceilings, windows, clothing. Yes, clothing. When the room wasn't required to be sanitized, there were some schools that were printing t-shirts with content on them for students. Sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? I can read your back, you can read mine, but what about the poor person in the front row? He doesn't have a shirt to read. He is now at a disadvantage. You could say the same thing about posters. If I was sitting next to a poster that just happened to have an answer to one of my test questions, I had an advantage over the person who is across the room who is too far away to read the poster. The covering of the room and the content did get a bit extreme. To make certain that all students have the same resources and advantages, the posters had to go. Let's take a closer look at some of these materials. What can remain on the walls are motivational posters or materials without content and standard periodic tables. Periodic tables? Yes. Periodic tables without additional content. If you do not know how to read a periodic table, it does not give you an advantage. Materials that are appropriate for instruction and display may not be appropriate during testing. Materials that contain content, problem-solving strategies, processes, etc. are unacceptable for display or use during testing. Even things painted on the walls. See the first equation that was painted on a classroom wall. or the three-dimensional sculptures or paintings used in a lesson must be covered. It's time for our third check for understanding. I will give you a couple of minutes to read through these yes or no questions, then we will discuss the answers. Okay, first question. Is it acceptable for a teacher to use his or her personal cell phone to communicate with another teacher about a testing situation in the classroom? No, it is not acceptable. Next question. Is it acceptable to allow general education students to use a handheld calculator instead of the online calculator? No, it is not acceptable to allow students to use a handheld calculator instead of the online calculator unless the online calculator is not functioning or the student has a disability requiring a handheld calculator. Next question. Is it acceptable to leave content on the walls in the testing room when administering a field test? No. Please clear the room of all content before testing occurs. Next question. Is it acceptable to allow students to read library or personal books as each student finishes and test materials are collected? Yes. But this is a local decision to allow the practice or not. This concludes Module 3 of 6 of the Administration Code Regulation. Please review all 6 modules to complete the Administration Code training. If you have questions, please contact us at KDE DAC Information by email, dacinfo@education.ky.gov, or give us a call at 502-564-4394. And thank you for participating in this section of the training of the Office Assessment and Accountability.